Hello, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Please join our experienced and knowledgeable panel of hosts as we explore the great mysteries of our time: Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and unexplained phenomena.
Hello, and welcome to Swamp Shadows, Tales from the Tupelos. I'm your host, Mike Richburg. Thank you for joining me this evening. This is the first ever installment of Swamp Shadows, Tales from the Tupelos. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to have you join me. And we're, of course, broadcasting as part of the Undiscovered Beast and Strange Phenomena broadcast family, I'm very happy to say. Tonight's session or episode will be about the Fort Mott Devil. Fort Mott, South Carolina, is a sleepy little place on the edge of the Colosseum Basin, just a forgotten dot on the map nowadays. You might not notice anything very strange about it, particularly if you were to wander far enough off the beaten path to stumble through Fort Mott. You might not even know you were there if you didn't see the small sign at the edge of town or slow down for the railroad track. You probably never noticed Fort Mott. But there was a time when Fort Mott was very important for a couple different reasons. So when things happened there, it was somewhat, big news. If you look closely, you might notice a certain trend in the area. Odd names of places. Devil's Elbow, Devil's Island, Devil's Track Place Plantation. There's a recurring theme there, a theme that I pay very close attention to, one that has led me to discover clues about other areas. And that's one thing I'll tell people from time to time that enjoy doing similar type research. It's kind of a tip, if you will. If you see a pattern where there is odd names being used, like if you're into looking for Bigfoot, say, for example, and you see a place on a map where, here's Monkey Mountain, and it's at the junction of Devil's Creek and Ape Canyon or something like that. Obviously there's a pattern there, right? So it's something worth investigating. So if you notice around Fort Mott, there are names like that that include the devil in the name. That might raise some curiosity, and rightfully so. You see, there is a Fort Mott Devil, and the tale of the Fort Mott Devil is very involved. And we have to go back in time. And I'm going to take you back now to a time before the American Revolution. Fort Mott was a thriving trade center. The British established the garrison of the Congarese at Fort Mott to facilitate trade in the region. At that time, more settlers had moved into the so-called back country, out of the low country. And as a matter of fact, there were probably 3 or 4 times as many people living up in the central part of the state as there was in the low country by then. Very happening little area, center for trade, because of where it lies, near the fork of the Congaree and Wateree rivers, where the Santee River starts. You see, back in the day, the river was the highway, you see. That's how goods made it up and down from the middle of the state to the coast, was via the river. There were no roads per se that were of any, significance. So most commerce, of course, used the river. And if you control the river, you control the highway. Well, Charleston, of course, was a very important center, a very important harbor, and the town of Camden South Carolina was also very important for military reasons. During the time of the American Revolution, it was extremely important. If you controlled Fort Mott, you could control the river right there and therefore control the flow of goods from Charleston to Camden. Up from Charleston up the winding and twisting Santee River at the time, all the way to the juncture of the Congaree and the Wateree, and then you take the Wateree north on to Camden. So that control of that region was very important if you intended to travel the river or send goods up the river or down the river. So Fort Mott was very important. When things happened around Fort Mott, it was kind of big news. You know, it was noteworthy. Well, after the American Revolution began, just to help you understand what's going on in the area there a little bit, the British were kind of taking a bit of a beating. And Lieutenant McPherson had sequestered the home of Rebecca Mott in Fort Mott there to dig in anticipation of the mighty Swamp Fox's assault on his troops. And that was good thinking because the Swamp Fox, General Francis Marion, was coming with reinforcements and cannon in tow. And he was somebody to be feared. So the Lieutenant McPherson sequestered the home of Rebecca Mott, which overlooked McCord's Ferry on the Congaree River. It was a great strategic location, if you will. The Swamp Fox, that is, did show up. And not to give an extended history lesson here, but just some background information. Even though the British had dug in around the home, dug trenches and whatnot, they were heavily outnumbered, and it was probably not looking too good for them. But then the home was set ablaze by no less than Rebecca Mott's own flaming arrow. She was not very keen on the British. They had sequestered her home and sent her to stay with a servant on the next hill over. Well, that didn't sit well with her. So she was all too obliged to burn her own home down and then forced the hand of the British where they were already facing overwhelming odds. Things were looking bad. The only hope for survival was to surrender, inevitably, and that's what occurred. So Lieutenant McPherson surrendered his forces at Rebecca Mott's home. This also was very important because this led, like a chain reaction things do in war, led to eventually Cornwallis's retreat from South Carolina and eventual surrender to George Washington. But before the American Revolution, something very strange happened in Fort Mott. Indeed, a strange tale that has been widely told throughout the region. And the tale will vary from time to time, but it's something on the order of this. The Lloyd home sat near Rebecca Mott's home. A strange, dark stranger, and as Warner Montgomery wrote in the Columbia Star in 2007, a dark, courtly stranger stopped at the Lloyd home. During dinner, John Lloyd became instilled with rage and began to shout profanities, and Rebecca Lloyd, John's wife, noticed this change in his demeanor. It was quite obvious, actually. Well, the strangers continued to evolve, and John went mad, if you will. The stranger's feet, it said, turned into cloven hooves and began to smoke. And his headgear's hat shifted, and Rebecca Lloyd saw horns. Now, at this time, it said that Rebecca Lloyd realized the devil was tempting her husband, and she hurriedly fetched the Bible, from which she read backwards. This, as it is told, sent the demon or the devil into a rage, and the devil fled the home, jumping all the way from the home up upon the top of the hill before fleeing into the swamp. When the devil stepped at the top of the hill, he left a footmark on a rock. That footmark is still there to this very day. I've seen it with my own eyes. Now, is it the devil's footprint? Maybe not, but it's something there, okay, worth noting. Now, this strange tale has been told many times in handed down fashion, so it will vary, but that's the gist of the story. Now, that's a whopper of a tale, obviously, and not unlike some other tales that have been told in other parts of America. But it's one that's very well rooted here, and it's persistent. So it makes you wonder, as a cryptozoological field investigator, it makes one wonder, like myself, that maybe, there's more to it. And, of course, there is much more to it. I've been a cryptozoological field investigator for over 4 decades now. Much of the time I've spent interviewing witnesses and tracking around in the woods and swamps has been in regards to the Fort Mott Devil or in that general vicinity for one reason or another, which we'll get into in just a little while here. It seems that when you ask people about the Fort Mott Devil, you kind of get a wide range of responses. If you were to ask the average person, they might not even have ever heard of the Fort Mott Devil, but maybe they have. The average person around here, that is. And if you ask, if they've heard of it, and if you would ask them what it is, well, you were going to get a different answer from just about everybody you talk to. Because in addition to this long-standing folk tale, for lack of a better term, there's also a wide-ranging and thorough history of sightings of unusual critters in the woods around Fort Mott. Many of these sightings through the years have been consistent with what people would call or do call in other regions of the country the goat man. Okay, similar to a man covered in hair, horns on his head, like a man covered in hair with a goat head. This is a pretty well-defined description of a type of entity that is reported in other areas, like I just mentioned, like a Maryland or wherever. And it's fair to assume that on some level, it's fair to assume that if you have enough sightings in the same area, the same type of thing, there may be something to some of it. Now, obviously, when you're an investigator and you're talking to people over the years, you learn pretty quick that a lot of people are just full of it. Hey, that's what it is. All right, but if enough people see enough things and it keeps repeating, there might be something to it. And that's what gets me going. See, like a lot of times people are just full of it, but sometimes there's a grain of truth to it. Like if there's smoke, there's fire, So I take all that with a grain of salt, but at the same time, when I look at some of these reports, and one of the most famous run-ins with a goat man type entity that was being referred to as the Fort Mott Devil was a farmer by the name of Nathan Young in the late 50s. In either 57 or 58, depending on who you ask and how it's told, Nathan Young had a long-running, ongoing series of problems with the Fort Mott Devil on his property there in Fort Mott, which is just right up the railroad track from these other two locations I mentioned, the Mott and Lloyd homes, or where they used to be. Well, it seems that this farmer, Nathan Young, had been having trouble with the Fort Mott Devil coming around there. At first, it was one of those things, as it's told, somebody was, creeping around, going in the bar, stealing little things. Some feed got missing, chicken missing, stuff like that. Nothing really too unusual. Probably just some homeless thief or something, vagabond, coming through the area. Well, that all changed one day when Mr. Young was out by his goat pen and noticed off in the edge of the woods this figure standing there, just staring at him. And it totally freaked him out because this thing, there again, was the typical goat man sighting. It looked like a man, but his head was a goat, okay? And it was covered with like a white to light gray hair, a recurring pattern in the morphology description. When you see this goat man type thing, typically the witness reports a light gray to off-white coloration. Not always, but typically. Well, of course, this unnerved Nathan as he saw this thing just sitting there just staring him down or whatever. So he went on back to the house, and that was that or whatever. But over time, Nathan would see these cloven hoof tracks on his property. And weird little things were still happening. And he would start putting two and two together. He figured, it's the Fort Mott Devil. It's Fort Mott Devil come in there and took that corn and took this, that, and the other, and probably took them chickens or whatever it was, And there was one case where they say that the man's livestock pen for his goats, the gate was left open, which is something he would never do, of course. All the strange little things were happening, and he had that visual, and then the strange things kept happening again, and then he saw it again. And this is over some period of time now, over months. Nathan Young saw the thing again, and it let out a blood-curdling wail that upset Mr. Young very much. So Mr. Young went to the house again. This time he fetched his shotgun. He came back out the back of the house and fired a warning shot. At that time, it said the Fort Mott Devil fled on into the woods, never to be seen again by Mr. Nathan Young. But the next morning, Nathan Young walked down his back porch, and there on the steps was the head of one of his goats. The rest of the goat ain't been found yet, nor did he ever see the Fort Mott Devil again. And that, of course, only led to more tales of the goat man and the Fort Mott Devil. Fort Mott Devil this, Fort Mott Devil that. All right, so that really got him stirred up. At the same time, there's been other reports, like more recent reports that I'm aware of. Ricky Glover was with a friend fishing at the juncture of the Wateree and Congaree rivers in a boat, and the wind picked up, and they decided to go up the Wateree River, which is a little bit smaller river and kind of a winding little river, to seek shelter from the wind. So they went on up the Wateree a little ways and set up and tried to fish there. And the whole time they was the new location, Ricky kept having that uneasy feeling, and you hear witnesses talk about this. You may have even experienced it yourself. where you feel like somebody's just watching you. You know, like somebody's around, you know, scoping me out. I don't know where, who, or what, but, you know, somebody's watching me kind of feeling. And he's had an uneasy feeling like that. And sure enough, after some period of time, he turned and looked at the riverbank, and there he saw it. And just as Nathan Young described it, it had a grotesque, unsightly face. And Ricky was close enough, within 100 feet probably, as he tells us, of the thing. So he got a decent look at it. Scared him to death, him and his buddy. Well, they got on out of there, and that was that. But there's been other reports, too. In 1992, Daniel Smalls was hunting in Fort Mott, near the river, near the Congaree River, that is. And he claims that he saw what also, look, and I talked to Daniel Smalls personally in great detail. And he told me that what he saw walked like a man. He could not see the lower body well, but he's got a good look at the upper body, basically walking through the woods. And he said it walked upright like a man, but it looked like a goat. And there again, it was the white coloration to light gray color, you know, kind of a dirty white color maybe. Got a real good look at the thing. It was a quick encounter. He got a look at the thing. The thing he don't think saw him. But it scared him really bad because it was just a horrible looking thing that wasn't supposed to be there. You can imagine you in the woods hunting, you sitting there with, in his case, a high-powered rifle in a tree stand, and you see something walking through the woods like that, you better believe he was gripping that rifle. And he probably wouldn't have hesitated to use it in self-defense. Judging from how upset he got when he was talking to me, I'll say the thing upset him pretty bad. And it never messed with him or looked at him or anything. And I kind of know how that is because I had a Bigfoot experience one time kind of like that. And we're going to talk about that one day too, but not tonight. So you have these people that keep seeing, you know, this thing looks like a goat man in Fort Mott. So that continues to perpetuate the legend of the Fort Mott Devil. At the same time, Fort Mott lies on the edge of the Colosea Basin, which is a very active region in regards to a history of Bigfoot activity. So if somebody was to see a Bigfoot in Fort Mott, then, you know, there's a pretty good chance that the knee-jerk reaction is going to say, oh, Fort Mott Devil. I saw something strange in the woods. Fort Mott Devil. Fort Mott Devil. And that's understandable because if you're from there and you hunt around there, you might have heard of Fort Mott Devil, and if you saw something weird in the woods, that's probably the first thing your mind's going to go to. So you got a thing where there's maybe some kind of goat man type entity being reported. Obviously there is. And then you got Bigfoot activity in the area. And I've spent a lot of time in the woods around Fort Mott on both sides of the Congaree and all around the conjunction of the Wateree and the Santee and all that. All on both sides of all them rivers. And there's Bigfoot there. And there's no doubt in my mind about that. There's other things living there, too. And this is also not quite adjacent to, but not very far from the very large Sparkleberry Swamp. And that's a doozy of a swamp right there. And all y'all from South Carolina just heard me say that and know what I'm talking about. You can get lost in Sparkleberry Swamp, and that's not a joke. I mean, it's pretty intense swamp. It's a fairly good-sized swamp. It's flooded woods, you know. It's full of gators and water moccasins. The whole area around there is kind of like that. So there's a lot of wildlife, a lot of hunting and fishing and farming, a lot of Bigfoot, some kind of goat man thing. And then to complicate or convolute matters even more, there's a thing that is reported in the area, a cryptid, if you will, a critter, an uncatalogued animal, perhaps. Some people call it the hide behind. And that's the show we're going to have one night pretty soon, too. Or a wolf ape. Maybe if you're from French descent, you would call it a loup-garou or a rougarou. Or if you were English settler, you would have called it the hide behind, of course. Otherwise known as a werewolf, dog man, whatever you want to call it. An upright, bipedal animal with prominent canine-type features, a snout, prominent canine teeth, a carried tail, that type of thing. And there's also been very odd tracks found by myself and others in the general area of the Coliseum Basin. Look a little bit like a human track, but is a slender curved track with 3 toes. Kind of an odd-looking track. And then when you see the 3 toes, it strikes you as very odd. 3 is kind of a weird number for toes on something with a track that big. I don't know, how to really describe the track other than it's curved, slender, and has 3 toes, 3 digits, not unlike a human foot. This is the same exact track or type of track of about the same exact size, coincidentally, that was found in a bean field in Fouke, Arkansas, so many years ago. Now, I know many of you have heard of the legend of Botke Creek. And that track, the famous Beanfield track that was cast there, was a 3-toe track that looks an awful lot like the 3-toe tracks that are found here in South Carolina. I have stood in the Monster Mart in Fouke, Arkansas, shoulder to shoulder with my good friend, researcher and author Lyle Blackburn. And we looked at that track cast. They had the actual cast of the track there in the Monster Mart in Fouke, Arkansas, and I highly recommend that destination, if for no other reason, to lay your eyes on that track and all the other cool stuff they have in there. But we sat there and I looked at that thing, and I looked at Lyle and said, that's the same daggone track, son. It's the same track. Now, for whatever that's worth, it's worth noting at any rate. I do like patterns, and you'll notice that listening to me on the subsequent broadcast. Patterns can lead you to discovery. They lead us to information. If the data reflects a pattern there, maybe there's a trend or pattern, then you maybe got something. There's smoke, there's fire, kind of thing. So you got all this convoluted situation where you have goat man sightings, dog man sightings, Bigfoot sightings, the legend, the folklore tale of the Fort Mott Devil from the Lloyd home visit just before the American Revolution. So this is a classic example, if you will, of the folklore clashing with cryptozoology. There's a lot of different facets to it, a lot of different tangents. It's hard to wrap your brain around all the stuff that, goes along with the overall topic of the Fort Mott Devil. But when you hear people talk, they believe. If you find somebody, go down to Fort Mott and find somebody, ask about the Fort Mott Devil, find you some old folks down at the general store somewhere out in the country down there. They'll tell you. It's for real. Whatever it is, there's something there. And there again, it's something that's so different to everybody. If you see a goat man, then the Fort Mott Devil's the goat man to you, right? If you hunting, like Mr. Smalls was, and you in the deer stand and you see a goat that's the size of a man walking upright through the woods just like a man, what do you make out of that? Well, I'm in Fort Mott, South Carolina. I bet you, Buddy Bro, I just seen the Fort Mott Devil. That's right. That's the first thing you're going to say. If you know about the Fort Mott Devil, you just seen the Fort Mott Devil. Some people, and there's not a lot of Bigfoot sightings in general, as a general rule anywhere, so to speak, but most of them happen real quick. And it's like that with other things too. You ever walking through the woods and jump a deer and the whole thing's over like in 3 seconds before you can even remember that you got a camera and you should take a picture, the deer's gone. So things happen quickly. And that's often the case, and most often the case, with Bigfoot encounters and encounters of other critters like that. So if you see a glimpse of a Bigfoot through the trees moving, oh my God, that wasn't a person. That was the Fort Mott Devil, So it's hard to say exactly what the Fort Mott Devil is, because it is different depending on one's perspective. But I think something, and this is just conjecture on my part, of course, I think something led to spurn the tale of the Lloyd home visit in the first place. In other words, there was probably something going on before that led to that story. Or if that was an actual event, and we can take it at face value, which I wouldn't, but if you did, then was that the first event? Well, we don't know. But chances are it probably wasn't. So whatever's going on around there, it's been going on a mighty long time. I would love to know about Native American folklore in the area, or know more about it. As far as I know, they don't have, like an equivalent story, if you will, for that region, for like a goat man or something like that. That would be a jackpot, though, if there was one. That would be further corroboration, if you will. Because as an investigator, you want to stay grounded. You want to use common sense. You can't take things at face value unless you're looking at physical evidence or something. You know what I'm saying? A lot of things, there's so many variables. You got to be careful in what you trust in. Some people will deliberately deceive to make matters worse. But you try to stay common sense oriented and well grounded in science, but at the same time, I think it's wise to take into account folklore and Native American lore as well. Because there again, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's often a grain of truth to many of these things. But it's shrouded in hand-me-down variations that, the story just kind of changes a little bit. And, every time somebody new tells it, it's got something different about it, kind of thing. You've played those games as a child, maybe. Somebody on one end of the classroom whispers something in somebody's ears. When it gets to the 28th kid down here, it's something totally different. It started off as a bologna sandwich, now it's a telephone call. So it happens. But you really have to take it into consideration. These early European settlers that came here encountered something, and it led to all these stories and the legend of the Fort Mott Devil. You can't just discount that. Not at all. You can't take it at face value, but you shouldn't throw it in the trash either, because it's a clue. It's one of those clues. It's part of the overall picture, and you have to take everything into consideration. Now, some people, and I don't have to remind many of you that there's some devout religious folks in the South But some people will tell you the Fort Mott Devil is just that. It is a demon. And it's not a biological entity. It's exactly like it was told in the legend of the Fort Mott Devil, the Lloyd home visit, the dark and courtly visitor whose feet turned to cloven hooves and began to smoke. That's very strange, a very strange tale, and there's certainly some religious overtones there. So many more hardcore or devout Christian and people of other faiths might lean toward a religious or, what you might say like a demonic explanation for what is taking place there. And that's fine. And I don't discount that totally. But at the same time, I want to see some science to back that up. Hey, that sounds good. You got some tracks you casted or some hair samples or something. Because, if it walks, it leaves a track, right? So that's what I'm really interested in. But at the same time, people and their perspective, because of their perspective, explain things and interpret things the best they can. So the Native Americans, it might be one thing. To a European settler 250 years ago, it might be something else. To somebody today that's out on the boat, on the river, and sees something, they might interpret it even differently. So we have to take all these things into consideration. But I tell you this, my gut tells me there's something very real going on in the Fort Mott area. It's been going on, obviously, for a very long time. The ordeal that Nathan Young went through in the late 50s was pretty bizarre and quite detailed and lengthy. It went on for months, I'm told. Of course, I never met Mr. Young. Would love to have talked to him. He's long since passed. But from all indications, he never changed the story any or backed down off of it or anything like that. It was just as a matter of fact about it as you can be. And he got a couple good looks at it. And the thing, there again, just like in the case of Ricky Glover and his buddy fishing on the river down there, it just stood there and stared him down. And that's very, very unsettling type of thing to happen to you. It's one thing to see something strange in the woods, but when it's noticing you and staring at you and just like acting like it's got a problem with you or wants to maybe like looking at you like you could be dinner or something, that's freaky. Freaky stuff. The tale of the Fort Mott Devil is a long and twisted tale. It's hard to say where it's going to end up, but it's going somewhere. Because I don't think it's went away. There's still sightings. Daniel Small sighting was in the early 90s, 1992. That man is an outstanding member of society. Probably if you met him, you would think this is probably like a good guy. He's probably an honest dude, where he just doesn't strike you as the kind of person as, just there to bullshit you. Okay? And I've talked to a lot of people, and I've seen plenty of people like that. As a field investigator for 4 decades, you talk to a lot of people. So you kind of get to where, you can see bullshit a mile away. It's just that simple. All right? So in the end, it doesn't matter what I think, because that's just another perspective. But I think I have a pretty healthy perspective on it just because I've investigated it for so long and talked to so many people and walked around in them woods and looked around and hung out with the old folks and talked to them. You can learn a lot hanging out with them old people. You remember that. Hang out with them old folks. They know stuff. They don't talk all the time, but when they do, you better be listening. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have thoroughly enjoyed this evening. That's going to be about all for tonight, though. I'm going to leave you with this, though. Something killed Nathan Young's goat and took Nathan Young's goat away after he shot at the goat man the day before, or when he shot the warning shot. That's real, okay? Ricky Glover and his buddy, they seen it. I don't think he's making that up, okay? It scared them both bad. They left and come on home. The way he was still upset when I talked to him. I talked to Daniel probably 2 or 3 times. A nice fella, very believable. Matter of fact, he knows what he saw. And it upset him. It didn't even look at him, mess with him, nothing, but it scared him because he knew it wasn't right. I appreciate y'all joining me. I hope you join me again next time on Swamp Shadows, Tales from the Tupelos. Thank you and good evening.